Have you ever walked down a dark alley and witnessed someone gouge out their own eyes? And even if you haven't, do you think you would forget such a spectacle? What if, to add to this, you knew this person's entire life story, all the reasons in their life that led them to have no other option than to gouge out their own eyes? Would you be able to forget it then? Perhaps you would even live life a bit more carefully, cautious of running into the same ominous omens that this now blind man did. And benefited by this, perhaps you'd be incredibly grateful for such a lesson, even to the point of sharing it with others. It is precisely this thought process for why the genre of tragedy is so popular. It allows us to come as close as we can to the most horrifying of experiences available to the human condition without actually being overwhelmed by the sheer shock of any gore or mutilation. If fear is based on the unknown, tragedy gives us the best opportunity to grasp it. And better yet, all the wisdom that you would gain from this experience, whether it be not taking life for granted or becoming more serious about your direction, wouldn't have to be just a once-in-a-lifetime chance occurrence, one experienced over the drawn-out course of months and years. It could be found in each great book, written over the past few millennia, where you would find this wellspring of lessons of how not to make the same mistakes that lead to, for example, gouging out your own eyes, which can precisely be found in what is widely considered to be the masterpiece of ancient Greek drama, Sophocles' Oedipus Rex, where the protagonist, after finding out that he sleeps with his mother and has murdered his father, does this precise act. It's not just tragedies which have these potent experiences in them. It's the entirety of literature. And ever since I discovered this in the first few books I read, it was like finding the key to the Matrix. No longer did we have to live 50 years of life to reap the lessons of 50 years. We could simply read the masterpieces which were written for the precise reason to communicate these vital lessons in a way that's both unforgettable and infinitely retellable. And this way of approaching literature shouldn't necessarily be surprising. Yet, for whatever reasons, it was to me, and still completely is, where countless former times of raising hands and asking the teacher questions like, "How will reading this book, or any of these books, help me in life?" are met with the answer, "Because these are great books, and our culture loves them," and so on and so forth. Given how leaving this question unanswered has doubtlessly contributed to the steady decline in literacy over the past few decades, it's worth listening to the first person to build on the principles of literary criticism since Aristotle, Canadian professor Northrop Frye.
The writer is neither a watcher nor a dreamer. Literature does not reflect life, but it doesn't escape or withdraw from life either. It swallows it. And the imagination won't stop until it's swallowed everything.
This image of the imagination voraciously swallowing everything has everything to do with the child's simple question. So, let's put this question to him, Northrop Frye. How does reading literature help anyone in life? So he begins his answer.
Let's start with the different ways there are of dealing with the world we're living in. Suppose you're shipwrecked on an uninhabited island in the South Seas. The first thing you do is to take a long look at the world around you, a world of sky and sea and earth and stars and trees and hills. You see this world as objective, as something set over against you, and not yourself or related to you in any way.
From this vivid beginning, he goes on to say that getting our bearings in this environment and noticing its lack of a human presence, the level of language we'd be using is that of awareness, a level which consists mostly of nouns and adjectives, names for things and qualities, wet, green, beautiful, and so on. For him, this level of language quickly turns into the language of, "I see myself in this," or "I want this," versus "I don't see myself in this," or "I don't want this." The distinction between the world we're living in and the world that we want to live in. He gives the example that whenever you first plant a crop or garden, there emerges the conception of a weed, the plant that you don't want in there. and that given this, you're now compelled to remove those weeds. With this, we're brought to the next level of language, the language of practical sense, of verbs or words of action and movement. He writes that, in some ways, it's a higher level of existence than the merely observant level, because it's doing something about the world instead of just looking at it. But, in itself, it's a much more primitive level. It's the process of transforming the environment in the interests of one species, something that also goes on among animals and plants. This is the area of the applied arts and sciences, and it appears in our society as engineering and agriculture, medicine and architecture. With this second level of language, the language of practical sense, we can see what the child is getting at with their question. How does reading books compare to engaging in activities that have actual material results like roads or hospitals or medicine? Frye's third level of language answers exactly this. He writes, "The third level is a vision or model in your mind of what you want to construct." And there's that word "want" again. It's basically the level of imagination, imagining what the world would look like in a human form after human desires were applied. A world of cities and gardens and farms that we call civilization. Frye says that even animals share this social form, but the difference is that we humans compare what we do with what we can imagine being done. So, just to summarize, we have 3 levels of language outlined. The first level of awareness, which is generally the English of ordinary conversation, monologue. The second level of practicality, or this technological language of teachers, preachers, politicians, and scientists. And finally, the level of imagination, which produces what we know to be the literary language of poems and plays and novels. Frye says that at heart, these are really just 3 different reasons for using words, as opposed to 3 different levels. And to elevate any of them is misguided, each having their own distinctive purpose. To the child's question of what use this third imaginative level of language has for us, Frye has a few central answers for us. The first is that the imagination is technically more real than everything else. Since everything you see around you, again the roads, hospitals, medicine, all of this was born in the human imagination first, and only after that created. Seeing this is seeing how the human imagination really can't do anything else than swallow everything up. This is one of the reasons that China, upon realizing that so many of the world's leading tech giants grew up reading science fiction, has recently spent billions of dollars getting their youth interested in the same food for imagination. They realize that the imagination frames everything from the ability to invent new technology to all of material history. This same motivation is also the original and somewhat lost point of great book programs. The point that there are these authors in the history of literature who have created works of the imagination that have utterly changed anyone who comes into contact with them, even entire cultures. Another complementary point is that this imaginative level guides what we may even conceive to be possible. It is of note that Frye titles the introductory work where I'm pulling a lot of this from, "The Educated Imagination." This explains why for most of history it was, and can still be, in the state's best interest to control narratives. They don't want our imaginations to be capable of dissent, or imagining different alternatives. Yet the issue with this is that it is suppressing the most fundamental element in human life. Like what was said earlier about witnessing a man gouge out their eyes, we'll learn an unforgettable lesson, one which raises an undeniable desperation to communicate to your fellow man, to show their imagination ways which they can avoid the same fate. Literature is this initial desperation realized as a calm, comprehensive effort, taken up over centuries to communicate essential wisdom. A final point turns on the way in which we as humans relate and grow in relation to anything. In order to develop a relationship, to learn about someone's life, normally we just spend quality time with them. Literature is designed to provide the same thing. If you're reading a truly good book, it'll take you into a sort of trance, exploring dimensions of life or the world your imagination hasn't graced before. If it's a masterpiece, there's a high chance that you'll never leave this trance. This is why Marshall McLuhan, the pioneering media theorist, described LSD as the lazy man's version of James Joyce's novel, Finnegan's Wake. In the same vein, when early Native Americans encountered literacy for the first time, it seemed like magic to them. And it gives you all the more perspective on how close reading is to something like psychedelics. When you are reading, you are, after all, literally looking at squiggles on a page for hours and leaving a different person. I have no idea how to explain that other than the phenomena of psychedelics. Anyway, for anyone still budding in their journey with books, remember that reading is a game where the tortoise always has the hare, and that the skill of reading works just like the muscles, which must be built up in order to bear fruits. I would be doing a disservice if I didn't leave with you the last way in which he describes literature, perhaps the best response to the child's question.
Literature as a whole is not an aggregate of exhibits with red and blue ribbons attached to them, like a cat show, but the range of articulate human imagination as it extends from the height of imaginative heaven to the depth of imaginative hell. Literature is a human apocalypse, man's revelation to man, and criticism is not a body of adjudication, but the awareness of that revelation, the last judgment of mankind.